Welcome to Birds in the Sky, the podcast where we explore how making art and music can be powerful tools for boosting mental health and well-being. Whether you're an artist, a musician, or simply someone looking for new ways to nurture your mind, we'll dive into creative practices, share inspiring stories, and uncover how the act of creating can lead to healing, self-discovery, and growth. Tune in and let your creativity carry you forward. I'm your host, Matthew Crane. Let's fly. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Birds in the Sky podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Crane. Today, we have Lindsey Chudzik, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She's working out of Florida. Lindsay, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Good. How are you?
I'm great. A lot of coffee, a lot of exciting things in my world this morning, but happy to sit down and talk. So first of all, we went to high school together, but I haven't really talked to you in at least over 10 years, I would say. So how did you get involved in the field of social work and therapy and looking to help people?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say my journey actually started prior to being a therapist. I was a chef for many of years, and that lifestyle finally took a toll on me. It's a hard lifestyle to live.
It's brutal. I've worked in the kitchens.
It's brutal. You have 0 weekends to yourself, 0 holidays, long hours in a very hot kitchen. I was typically the only female in the kitchen amongst many of men. And it was time. So I decided to shift gears and wanted to pursue helping others in a different way versus serving them delicious food. And went back to school for my associates. I basically started over and then went on to get my bachelor's in social work and then master's as well.
That's awesome. So service has kind of just been your path regardless.
It's my thing, just in a different way.
And just helping. That's super cool. I'm a big foodie. My wife and I are both foodies. So we try to cook a lot as much as we can. Well, for anybody that's listening, where is your practice? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me in Fort Myers, Florida. I own my own private practice here, and I'm actually in my office as we speak, and just serving the community. My license is only for Florida, so I serve people all over in Fort Myers, but outside as well, doing telehealth too, so just for the state of Florida.
Very cool. And before we started the podcast, we talked a little bit about, my primary demographic of who's listening. The show is for everybody, but I'm reaching a lot of male listeners. And that's important to me because in the veteran community, especially the male veteran community, there's a lot of push it down and don't talk about things. But that's sort of that stigma has been changing a lot in the last few years. And there's more and more of these, we'll call them professional tough guys, right? Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and folks like that are really doing everything they can to reground themselves and learn how to be open and love and be emotionally available to their family and their communities, because, we had 20 years of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and, a lot of these guys served all 20. So there's a lot of push it down onto the next mission. We got to be effective. But now with people coming back and being in their communities, that's not that world, right? So there was traditionally a clash in those two ways of living, and that's where you get a lot of veteran stigmas and stuff, and that they're cranky and crazy and all this stuff. But I've noticed on my end a big shift in that thinking. Do you have any experience with veteran clients?
I do, actually. And speaking of that shift, I feel like more recently I have noticed a shift where more men are reaching out, and in particular, whether from military background and or first responders and that type of population as well, that they, for whatever reason in their life, has just been experiencing mental health issues for so long that they're at this point where I'm really needing help and I'm needing services and wanting to reach out.
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation that's the whole point of my show, is to try to just to foster a resource where people can talk and share and kind of, I guess, build a community around that sort of stuff. So do you have any experience with creative modalities in your practice? Do you do anything like that?
Creative. So I'm definitely more on the side of I consider myself a trauma therapist. So creative wise, I wouldn't say we're doing necessarily any type of like art or music, because I know that that's something that you certainly focus on in your podcast.
Sure.
But I am trained in something that does get a little creative. It's called accelerated resolution therapy. It is an intensive therapy that actually really dives deep into the subconscious mind using a bilateral eye stimulation. So it really helps to resolve distressful images, sensations, symptoms that people might be experiencing, and particularly people with a military background who have experienced war and are either experiencing PTSD symptoms or have been diagnosed with that. Is very helpful and to resolve these issues that they might be experiencing. Part of the process is actually using your imagination, creativity. We use humor and fun. And although people experience not ideal or humorous or fun events in their life, this particular process actually helps the brain to rewrite the story or like rewire the brain to be thinking about what they might have experienced in a different way. So they get to bring in metaphors, they get to bring in their creative side and just kind of treat it like a dream where anything is possible. So we're not really looking for reality. Subconscious doesn't really respond to that. It responds to colors, it responds to images. So I like to have fun with that. I like to bring in humor so that after the process is over, when the person thinks about an event that might have been distressful to them, it's no longer distressful. It doesn't have an emotional response at all, but maybe there's a new memory that comes up. Maybe the mind is just thinking about it in a completely different way. Sometimes people then have a smile to their face or have some sort of laughter to it, and or the memory is just not really there at all and something has replaced it.
And this is what now, ART?
Yeah, so
Advanced
definitely that's how I usually say it, because accelerated resolution therapy is a
art.
mouthful. Yeah, so I go with ART or art, and that's what it's mostly known for. Yeah.
So part of this you mentioned, I think, bilateral eye movement. Is that like, I've done so much therapy in my life, I don't remember what each individual thing is, but I don't know if it's EMDR or what you're talking about following a light, tracking a light, with just your eye movements back and forth while you're kind of walking through a traumatic event. Is it
Yes.
anything like
So
that?
yes, absolutely. So ART and EMDR are similar in that way, where they both use bilateral eye stimulation. EMDR typically uses tools. So they'll use a light bar or headphones with sound or tappers. And ART is specifically just my hand. So the client follows my hand with their eyes and gets their eyes to move that way. So I have a
Okay.
really big right muscle because I'm
Yeah,
constantly using my hand and moving
for
it back
sure.
and forth from left to right. But yeah, that's how I was trained, and that's just the tool that we use in ART.
Okay. And it sounds like this is obvious, but I want to talk about obvious things. That the key to any kind of therapy is being willing to address the issues, to be willing to come in and face the thing, right?
Yes.
And for me, art and music and just even humor, creative things, those are doorways, or it's almost like the sugar that helps the medicine go down. It's a good entry point, I think, to really confront this kind of stuff. My last guest was a retired Green Beret and did many tours in many countries. And he didn't start painting until he got out of the service, but he kind of found it as a way that he could not dissociate at all, like exactly the opposite. Go in to the place, remember the trauma, focus on the trauma, but be doing something else constructive at the same time. And I hear a lot of echoes of that. So being willing to just, first of all, you need to know you want help, right? I mean, that's an individual journey for everybody. Is there, do you find clients come in only when they're at a rock bottom scenario, or that when loved ones kind of push them in that way?
Yes, but I think that there's a mixture of both. I think everybody goes through their journey in life, and at some point in time, there's a light bulb that kind of goes off, whether it is like a partner or a family member or something that says, hey, look, like I've been noticing these things. I think that maybe you need to reach out for some help. And or they've also experienced something in their life where they're like, I've experienced this enough. Like they've met their threshold and they are ready to seek help and reach out for support that way. So eventually, at some point in time down the line, down the journey that they're experiencing, something gets them to reach out. And that in itself is very challenging for people, because not only is it the awareness and acceptance of, yes, I need some help, but then making that initial step to reach out and ask for that help.
Yeah. There's a great poster at the VA facilities that has a I don't know who the quote is by, but it says it takes the courage of a soldier to ask for help. And I wish more vets would go into these places and see these things. But again, that's the point of the podcast. Digressing a little bit, there's also a big push in psychedelic therapies among the veteran groups. And I guess just in society in general. I have my own experiences with that before it became a trend, but I don't know. Do you have any opinions on that? I know I don't want you to advocate things, although you live in the Wild West state of Florida. So
Well, yeah. And that's what I'm here for. I'm more of, I can share with you that I too have experienced on the personal side, psychedelics before it was even a thing, and have also experienced psychedelics as it became a thing and as a professional, because I had noticed the need for it, had noticed a shift in medicine for it. So if people were not having results with the medication that they might have been taking, that then these things were an alternative. And I love alternatives, right? Holistic approach, a little bit more natural. And some people might have a different opinion in regards to what's holistic or natural, but I do believe that this is a better option, and can be for people, and think that it can really transform how someone thinks and feels, mind, body, and spirit after experiencing psychedelics. So I have worked with clients who have gone through psychedelic experiences, whether it's ketamine or psilocybin or something of that nature. Ketamine is legal here in Florida, so we can mess with that a little bit more, and have found great results with people. And so I just integrate the therapy after they've experienced the ketamine, and find that to just be an added bonus to the ketamine treatment, so that we're processing whatever was coming up during those times. I certainly think I'm an advocate for, and I could say I'm an advocate for psychedelics for sure.
That's cool. When I got out of the Navy, it was 2006. So this was like before the iPhone dropped, and there were even like apps and widgets and things like that. So at that time, if you wanted to contact the VA or seek therapy of any kind, there was like early Google and also just the yellow pages. We had paper phone books still.
You're taking me way back now with those
Yeah,
yellow
so
pages.
it was right. So it was, but 2006, it was a long time ago. But I had found, and not that I was necessarily, I was an alcoholic, right? I drank. That was my vice. I'm 12 years sober now. But I found when I got out of the Navy, I started dabbling in mushrooms really just to see concerts and, Tom Petty and, like just stuff like that. But I started having these really pretty transcendental experiences. Obviously, that's what they're for. But what was key to me is I didn't have any desire to drink when I was doing that. And I drank every day. And that was pretty telling to me, but I never really thought about it until the recent few years, because during that journey, 2006, I didn't get sober until I think 2013 or something like that. So from 2006 to 2013, I was using actively and all kinds of substances. After, long story short, getting this far in my sobriety and hearing people that are advocating to get off of like alcohol use disorder through psilocybin and things like that. And it's hitting me like my past is coming back, being like, oh yeah, I remember like those were the only times I didn't drink, is when I wanted, like going to a Tom Petty concert and not drinking. That's insane. But you eat a couple mushrooms and it's way better of an experience. You remember the show, you're not crashing your car later on after they wear off,
Correct.
that sort of stuff. So I don't know, it was a long diatribe. You're the guest, and I just kind of took over the conversation, but it has its place in, I think, substance use disorders as well, like namely alcohol. Do you have any experience working with people with substance issues?
I do, definitely.
Is that part of your practice?
Yeah, I do. It seems to come through my doors more often than not, just because it's typically co-occurring. So if somebody has a mental health issue or issues or a diagnosis that it typically is paired with, it can be paired with some sort of substance use, whether that's drugs or alcohol. So yes, I do work with individuals that have both or just one. Sometimes people come. I've actually had a flush of people who have been in inpatient treatment and have done their days and left the treatment center and is now looking for outside continued help. Most of these people have actually experienced ART within the treatment, but they were only to kind of do surface level and couldn't really see the therapist consistently. So researched outside to see where an ART therapist was, and they come and find me.
Well, I mean, thank you for your work. It's important. People need to have these places to go and do the active work, because it's not like you go to therapy and you're done. right? Like there's a day where like, oh, I'm fixed. Now I can go back into my life. To me, it's been my experience. It has to be a continued practice.
Yes.
Much like I tell my kids all the time, like we have a dentist, we have a doctor, we have a therapist. Like they've never experienced any kind of trauma, but it was important to us as parents to have that connection of place where like there's things you don't have to talk to us, but it's good. And they do play therapy. Obviously, they're very young, but it's
Love
been
that.
beneficial. It's been beneficial for them, just trying to break the mold of like how we grew up and the generation that we grew up.
Yes, and bringing normalization to it. And it's just like going to the dentist. It's just like going to the doctor. And I love that you instill that into your children, that it's just another appointment. It isn't this abnormal person or place that we're going to. And oftentimes I think therapy is also associated with when people do hit rock bottom. I think you would ask that question of like, is it more of when people are at their rock bottom versus sometimes people come because life has been going well, but maybe they're just experiencing this life transition and they just feel like they are managing it the way that they would have. Right. So there isn't like deep trauma. There isn't like a history of substance use or anything like that. But that I think of it more of like a car, right? So if you're driving a car, you go so many miles, you take it to the auto shop, you get the oil change, you get the tires rotated. Okay, well, I think of the same thing as like our brain and how we experience life. We go so many miles. Well, we gotta go to the therapist office. We gotta get our tires rotated and our oil changed, right? And just kind of like update our mind, update our body, and get us realigned to where we need to be.
So with that, let's change it to like I just had this thought as we were talking, but something kind of wild. But is there any chatter in your profession among your colleagues about AI and its value and being able to be an outlet? Because I like there's chat bots and I just like I worry that there's going to be a chatbot therapist. I don't want to be old and sound like I'm not open-minded. Am open-minded into that being beneficial, but I think there's a critical component of not being human to being able to identify and understand, because we say things indirectly a lot as people, and machines don't understand something that's not a one or a zero, or can't decipher between a feeling that isn't set in stone that waffles back and forth. So what is the chatter like in your end, in your field about AI and the
Yes.
outlook?
Lots of chatter, lots of chatter. I would say it depends on who you would ask as to what kind of chatter they would give you about their thoughts and feedback on that. Would say that there may down the line be some benefits to them. I'm open-minded to the benefits of that. There is an electronic health record platform that I use that's introducing AI into my progress notes for clients, right? So that then the AI takes over what it is that I am writing. I'll say I'm not sure I'm behind that 100% because I don't know the validity of that because it's not coming from me directly. I am the professional. Ethically, I don't know. There's a lot of chatter around the ethics in regards to using AI, but know that this is also up and coming, right? We might not necessarily have full control over at some point that this is just what it is versus I think that they're introducing it slowly but surely and seeing how it's going. So, but yes, I think the ethical piece is really big for professionals, and there's lots that can't get behind it, but there's also some that may get behind it because it's very convenient, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's what's best practice and what's best for the client.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way about that. I mean, I never thought about the ethics of it. I'm more about the connection point, but yeah, the ethics is huge as far as like, yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And also if you're looking to speak with another human and need that space, are you going to necessarily feel the same way with an actual human versus not? And what does that
Right.
do for the person's healing journey? I question that.
One of the biggest breakthroughs for me personally was along my journey, I had heard that the space between two people could be considered as God, right? If you're having a hard time having like a higher power or you're not a religious person or anything like that, just the idea of the space between two people sharing space, having somebody who's listening, who's not waiting for their turn to talk, who's actually just there for you, is that was the critical part of my like healing and recovery and just how I'm able to move through the world. at this point. And I can't see ever having an AI being able to do that. Otherwise, it's just a machine that's off while you're talking. And it's not like there's no empathy, I guess, is the big part.
How genuine is that empathy if it's generated?
Right.
So where is that empathy really coming from versus I am also a human, and at the end of the day, I can have empathy for you, and not necessarily because I went through the same thing or a similar thing, but that I just have that compassion for you and that it's genuine and authentic versus where would that be coming from if it was an AI robot sitting across the way from you?
I
And
mean, it's happening. It's gonna happen. Like,
I know
regardless
it's
of our
coming.
opinions on it.
It's coming.
So it's really just like adapt and get with it. And,
Yes.
you know, maybe everything will just be like, it'll be hipster to be a therapist, right? Like I go see a real human. You go to your bot still.
Yeah. That's like the cool thing. That's the in
Right.
thing, is to see a real therapist. Like at one point, it'll just be like the old school way, right?
Yeah. No, I'm still old school. I still talk to people. No.
Say, say.
This is a question I'm going to start asking because most of my guests are veterans or first responders in some way. And I'm glad you brought them up too, because they are definitely a part of this whole conversation. Wait, before I get off topic, let's talk about the first responder community. They have insane work schedule demands, and they have a suicide epidemic that matches the veteran crisis.
Yes.
Their numbers are pretty much in line. Something's got to be done with it's the work shifts that these people work are insane, and there's no room for mental health. Like, there's a lot of push to do it, but there's a big threat of, hey, if I go talk to somebody, they're going to take my badge away, or they're going to take my gun, or, like, within reason, that's understandable. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that can do this job for 20 years, experience a lot of different stuff, and still maintain, trigger discipline and bearing and stuff like that. But inside, it's just hellfire and chaos. You know what I mean? Because they never get to. Another guest of mine who's a police officer here in the area he was also a Marine sniper. The difference is when you're in the military and you come back from a deployment, you can rest from that deployment, right? You're back in the States, you're going to your gym and the restaurants you like. When you're an EMT or a firefighter or a police officer, you're in the combat zone 24 hours a day, 365, unless you go on vacation. And they go to work, they come back in the same communities generally. So they're never really switched off. That is a huge, huge opportunity to kind of change a big part of the mental health crisis in America, I think, is really just looking at, if you crunch the numbers of all the fire departments, police departments, EMTs, everything, that's a lot. That's millions of individuals, right? If there was some kind of policy to address all that and mandating greater workforce numbers so that there's better shift schedules and stuff like that. Do you have any thoughts on that? This is pretty deep into maybe not your area, but you're a person and you have opinions on the state of mental health in the world. Is there something that we could be doing for this population as a country?
Yes. And actually, this is more in my wheelhouse. I do work with first responders. I have many conversations around what it is that you're inquiring about and asking about. And absolutely, there is no break, right? There is this constant go. There is this constant re-traumatizing every time we go back into the workforce, right? With no instilled self-care. What are we doing outside of that? Is anyone even speaking to these first responders about that, right? And then there's also this mental health stigma of like pushing it down. Like you said, we're not nervous or fearful that our badge is going to be taken away. We're not going to go there. We're not going to deal with that. And the 24/7, right, of the work schedule, it's not feasible for any human. In my opinion, I don't know who came up with like the 5-day work week, but I just always thought that was crap to me. And I was just looking for more of like a 3-day work week and like a 4-day weekend, and people are much more productive that way. I don't think humans are meant to be on 100% all the time. It's just not realistic. But I'm thinking that, as a culture change, right? I do know like firefighters, they have a different schedule in regards to, they may work 48 hours all together, sleep at the house, and then go home for however many days. And so they have a rest there. versus police officers might be working a bit more in more of a consistent work week, right? And then have like 2 days off or a day off or none for that matter. So I definitely think that needs to be shifted, but also where are we filling the gaps, or where are we able to connect the two in regards to mental health and checking in, who's checking in with these responders, who's asking questions, and or we're just being silent. And if you need help, you just know that it's there. It's very challenging, again, for people to be reaching out if we're not checking in there and asking questions.
Right. And then there's the other thing, and like some of the higher tiered military groups, like your Navy SEAL groups and Green Berets, Special Forces communities, where there's 12 people on a team and that's it. That's all they talk to. That's the only people they trust on this planet. How do you introduce a therapist to them, right? Without, like, if I go see it, then this guy's going to think that I'm not going to have his back because he's not sure about my ability to perform under stress. And that's a legitimate conversation, a legitimate fear for the other soldier. So, I mean, maybe it's something as simple as like mandatory, like if you're in a police force or an EMT or a firefighter, whoever your person in charge is, had some kind of like baseline understanding of how to talk to people and how to be available, right? Like emotional availability skills of some sort for leadership, right? I don't know if that's something that could be taught. I don't even know how long it takes to get qualified to be a therapist, but certainly they couldn't do that. But surely there could be like an abridged, workshop scenario to help veterans and first responders and people that are working on high functioning teams. The EMTs, that's a crazy world. These people get paid minimum wage to save people's lives and work.
It's insane.
Like 24 hours a day. Yeah. That's insane without a thank you,
Right.
Anyways, I digress, but I think there could be some value in like therapist-led workshops for first responder groups.
Yes.
And their leadership. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think something that you said about kind of like the next person, like the person next to you would question, like if you were seeing a mental health therapist, right? Like your ability versus, can we shift that, like that mindset and that perspective that when somebody comes to a therapist for mental health, that it's actually increasing their productivity. It's actually increasing how that they manage stress, right? Because over time, our body learns to respond in a different way to protect us from stress, which isn't always productive. And that can actually skew the way that somebody might show up, rather than if they come to therapy and they're resolving some of these things that are creating stress, that then they are able to think clearly, right? And they have more mental clarity. Their cortisol levels are down. They're able to think straight. They can concentrate more. They actually may even touch base on in regards to little self-care interventions that they could be doing in between to manage this stress that they might not have any knowledge of, right? They're not informed to be doing these types of things. So mental health, changing that whole mindset around what it actually could be doing versus the stigma, oh, if you go there, then you're inadequate. That doesn't necessarily align with my thought in regards to mental health therapy. People come because they want to be better. They want to change. They want to heal, right? And feel calm in their mind and their body and be able to function in life.
So would you say that it sounds like you're saying that it would be easier to change the stigma and the culture or the identity of therapy as a positive thing rather than training like a shift commander or something like that?
Yeah, well, we can do
be
one in the
emotionally
same.
available. Sure.
Yeah, we can do one in the same, right? And really talk about how mental health can be beneficial versus what mental health is used for, right? I think mental health, we talk more so of like, yes, therapy is used for X, Y, and Z, right? In this laundry list of things. But what can we actually get out of therapy? What are the outcomes? I always talk about that with clients. Like, what are you 6 months down the road? How would you like to feel in your mind and your body, right? Even after today, visiting in our initial appointment, how would you like to feel? And talking more about the benefits versus the latter. And then also having an open space where somebody can go to, yes. But again, how do we bridge that gap for people to feel comfortable to go there, right? To utilize that positive space. That's the challenging piece there.
Right. So that it reminds me, and I brought this up because I was listening to a short clip and a podcast interview clip of I think I don't know if they were a therapist, but it was like a mindfulness lecture to a fire department. And like nobody was showing up to this thing. And it turned out that the word mindfulness was the thing that these tough guys didn't like. So when this person changed the workshop to tactical brain training, way better outcomes as far as attendance and stuff like that. So the way information is presented is really critical, especially for people that are so guarded and are required by their jobs to be steadfast and stoic and stand in the face of danger, right?
Correct. And so then asking, how would you like to be standing in the face of danger? Do you how do you respond typically, right? Is there something that's going on in your mind or your body that feels uncomfortable, but you're pushing it down because you have to do your job, versus let's resolve what you're pushing down so that you can do your job better? And really focusing on actually what's happening versus beating around the bush. Like, hey, do you need mental health help? Okay, because if you ask that question, you're going to get a no. Versus, let's just kind of put ourselves in their shoes for a moment and what they possibly might be experiencing, but that they're not sharing with anybody. Because we just know in this field that if you experience trauma, your body holds that. It's going to resurface and or be chronic. So at some point in time, military, first responders, and others are going to be experiencing something uncomfortable or unwanted in their body, but they are either suppressing it, pushing it away, masking it, using alcohol, whatever that they might be doing. So if we can kind of address it in a different way, maybe a little bit more specific, that might be helpful to bring light to, or to bring awareness to what's going on.
I love that. And I love that you brought up the body, because I'm sure you know the book, The Body Keeps Score, or it's called something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something that resonated with me too, in that it actually induces mental, emotional stress, can cause physical implications in the body. That's correct, right? Yeah. So it's hugely important to deal with these things. Okay. Now I'll go back to the question I was going to say before I brought up this whole tangent here.
It's okay.
So thanks for being a willing conversation.
You got it. I'm a therapist. We can go wherever you want. I got you. I'm following you.
I told my wife before this started, because I was dealing with some other stuff before, and I was like, I'm so glad I'm talking to Lindsay. It's like, she's not my therapist, but it's a therapist. Just thanks for holding space for me.
You got it.
But something I'm going to start asking all my guests that aren't in the veteran community or anything like that is, what are some, I guess, observations of veterans that you have, like overarching kind of, if you're going to unfairly typecast us, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, what do people think about veterans? Are they an asset to society, or are they a misunderstood tool in the shed?
Well, I wouldn't refer anybody to a tool in the shed, because I think that everybody is human. Everybody serves a purpose on this earth, one way or another. I think that the population is not taken care of well, and I think that they are misunderstood, and they're not being understood in the ways that they need to in order to get services. And I absolutely believe that maybe we chat a little bit more about how to bridge that gap. Or I'm glad you asked that question, because I feel like also the universe has been giving me these situations where it has really brought more awareness to me in regards to how we need to be bridging the gaps for services for these individuals that seem to be missing.
Right. So do you find veterans that didn't get what they were looking for at the VA come through your door? Is that how they get there, or are they referred by the VA to you?
Yeah, no one has ever referred to me by the VA. I have only, and more so recently, I have had two gentlemen, both ex-military, come to me because their VA services were inconsistent. They connected with therapists. They were connected with therapists that they did not connect with, or these therapists really didn't see them weekly, and they weren't addressing the trauma that really had brought them to needing help to begin with. And so for that reason, they had gone outside of the box and had searched for a therapist in the community and found me. I also know a friend of mine whose partner was in the military. He actually just experienced a friend who died by suicide, and he reached out
A
to
veteran?
yeah. And he had reached out to, no, his friend was not a veteran,
Okay,
but
okay.
my friend's partner is.
Got
And
it.
so he reached out to the VA for some services, and apparently it didn't go well. It just was an awful experience for him. They minimized the situation. They didn't really give that understanding or that compassion, and he ended up not following through with services. And he's okay, but also because he has that support, and I know that. But what if it wasn't him? And what if it was someone else? And so that just brings some question as to what are we doing here to ensure that people are getting services no matter what they're going through. If they're calling and they're asking, we can't shy that away. We can't minimize what it is that they're going through. I also had an encounter with a police officer. So as a human, I was having an awful day. And to top it all off, I was speeding and I got pulled over. And so here I am, okay, on my way to work, and I start crying. I'm like sobbing, ugly cry, like the whole 9 yards. And this was not a tactic to get out of the ticket whatsoever. It was just like literally the cherry on top. I'm getting pulled over right now. Right. So he comes up to the car. I can barely look at him, and I'm grabbing my wallet. I knew he was going to ask for my license. And I finally look over, and all the tears are just flowing. And he just looks at me and he says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm just having a day." And he says, I appreciate that. He's like, we all have our days. He talked to me like a human. It was like a really great experience. And it got better because he then asked me where I was going. And I said, oh, geez, here we go. So I said, I'm on my way to work. He said, what do you do for work? I said, I'm a mental health therapist. Mind you, I'm still ugly crying and sobbing, like can't get it together. I am like straight up all human, extra raw in my feelings. And he just stops me after I say that I'm a mental health therapist, and he asks me for my card, for my business card. And I looked at him and I said, what? And he said, yeah, your business card. He's like, can I get that? He's like, I have been trying to get services with the VA for 9 months, and I haven't been able to get anything. And he's like, and I've also been struggling with PTSD for 10 years. And I have a wife at home who's struggling with postpartum depression and a 2-month-old. And he's like, and I need help. And he's like, and you are a human. And by you showing me emotions, that you are also going through things in life. And because I shared a little bit about what I was doing, that he felt that connection, right? And I guess that goes back to like the AI robot. Here I am, real raw emotion, can't make it up. This is what I'm going through, but I'm also a mental health therapist, right? And that was very important to him because he had shared that he had never really gotten that connection before with a person that he had sought out for help previously. So those were my 3 kind of experiences that I've had in the past month that like really resonated with me and opened up my eyes to, wow, we really need to do something here. So I gave him my card, and here we are today. I told him I don't think he wanted me to be his therapist, but he reassured me that he did. So I really took that in and reflected on that and thought that was really a big, so. And I did not get a
That's,
ticket.
well, that was going to be my follow-up question.
I didn't end up getting a ticket.
No, you got
He
a
wrote,
client instead.
well, I can't confirm or deny that, but
Sure, sure.
I appreciated that I only got a warning, and I have a great driving record. So, it was like a once in a blue moon here. So yes.
Well,
And
those
also,
are great stories.
yeah, well, I also brought that story to my brother-in-law. He is a firefighter, and we were just talking about the same thing in regards to how can we, even in this community in Florida, bridge the gap for services for that population, because that's missing, and that he has experienced people who have died by suicide, and there's not a lot of follow-up. There's no follow-up. There's no services. It's like everyone just kind of
Shows up to work the next
carries
day.
on. Yeah, and it's like we got to do better here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing those stories. They were very serendipitous and poignant to today's conversation. It's like the universe knew you were coming to speak with me. Um, all right. Well, let me just ask one more question and then we'll get out of here.
Sure.
I know, again, this isn't your thing, but uh, it kind of sounds like the best way forward, no matter if it's ART or EMDR or music therapy, it's about kind of facing the trauma or the event and kind of decoupling your physical response to that event so that you can process it in a consistent way. You're not in a fight or flight space, right? And for me, I'm trying to encourage folks to find ways to do that. And painting and even just like strumming a guitar without playing chords kind of does that for me. I can daydream and decouple serious things and actually process them without having my heart start kicking up and slamming. So would you see a benefit in veterans and first responders kind of experimenting with things like making art? I mean, and you don't have to be good at these things too if you're listening. Don't let
No,
the idea of like, I'm not going to be Eddie Van Halen discourage you from trying to learn how to play guitar. I mean,
correct.
it's you know what I mean? Like, just
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think I think those are all beautiful interventions. And I absolutely think that depending on the person, you have to find what works for you. And whether it is strumming a guitar, whether it is painting, whether it's journaling, whether it's walking outside, whether we're like, I teach my clients how to like do bilateral eye stimulation on their own so that they have that tool for themselves, which is great. So if that's something that works for them, they can do that. There's emotional freedom techniques. So that's tapping and like moving energy throughout the body. That's more like quantum healing and just shifting the energy in that way. So we can only transmute the energy, right? We get rid of it or maneuver in that way, but we can move it in our body. And so there is countless ways to help our bodies physically feel calm and relaxed. And also when we are in the midst of a therapy journey and you're consistently using bilateral eye stimulation or something else that gets your, rest and digest going in your body, that it's easier, right? It gets easier as time goes on, as you resolve the trauma that has been holding in your body, that these things are much more manageable to take care of with these interventions that you bring into. So you don't have to be Vincent van Gogh. You don't have to be the lead singer of Metallica. As long as it feels good to you and you're enjoying it, that's all that matters.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Lindsay. Thanks for coming on the show and talking to me today. That's all I really had as far as questions. Did you have anything you want to promote or anything you wanted to add?
No, not at this time. But thank you so much for inviting me. I certainly, obviously, am an advocate for accelerated resolution therapy. So you can always go on acceleratedresolutiontherapy.com to get more information in regards to that type of therapy. If you're in Florida and or visiting and or somewhere in my neck of the woods, feel free to reach out if you're ever needing any sort of therapeutic help.
Awesome. And I will put all of the links to your practice and where people can find you in the podcast descriptions and all of that. So
Awesome.
that's
Thank
it.
you.
This
All
has been
right.
Birds in the Sky. I'm your host, Matthew Crane. Thanks for stopping by.